Well, good morning, everybody. We're glad to see you here today. Everybody online, we're glad you could be here with us as well. So I want to start off this morning just by sharing a couple of stories about a few people. First is about a young woman named Whitney. And Whitney had a job that she really enjoyed. She still enjoys it. But it was a demanding job. And it asked a lot of her emotionally, mentally at times. It was one of those jobs where it's draining, and at the end of the week, you just kind of feel wrung out a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good way to live. You feel like you did something that week. But she entered into this season where every week she just kind of gave it her all, and then she just started to feel a little run down and a little tired. And she felt drained and kind of diminished. And then it got to the point where, she was kind of not depressed, but a little disparaging. And she would go to bed at night. She was exhausted. And she'd wake up, and she was just as tired when she woke up. And then she'd push through the day and give it her all and come home and feel, you know how it goes. You get into that cycle. And then she'd go to church on Sunday. She sang in the choir. She loved that. She listened to a message from the minister. It could be the most uplifting message that he could muster. And yet she would still feel just ready to throw in the towel. And it just kind of went that way for a while until one afternoon she got home from work and she kind of broke. She just fell on her bathroom floor and just began to sob uncontrollably because it was all just too much. It was too much stress, too much pressure. It was too much drain, too much. It wasn't working, right? Like life just wasn't working. There had to be a better way. Another story is about a guy named Stephen. Stephen, as a young guy, he cultivated for himself kind of an enviable life, really. I mean, in college, he was a really good swimmer, and so he played water polo for UC Berkeley. And along that same time frame, he qualified for the U.S. Olympic swim team in the 90s. So pretty good at what he did. And he was a pretty good singer, too, because he sang in this a cappella group. They recorded an album, and they actually toured across Europe for a while. And while he was over there kind of hopping from city to city, he got to go on some fun adventures. He went skydiving, he went hang gliding, he hiked to the Swiss Alps, he swam in the Andaman Sea off the coast of Thailand. Like he did some pretty cool stuff. And when that season came to a close, he started a career as an economic consultant, and it's about as lucrative as it sounds. He did pretty good for himself. But despite all of this adventure and this comfort and so on, he had kind of this emptiness inside of him. And he looked for ways to fill it, and he thought, maybe if I get a different job, maybe something a little more rewarding, something a little more service-oriented. So he became a teacher. And he liked being a teacher, but he still felt that emptiness inside. And so he thought, maybe if I find the right person. And he found a wonderful woman. They got married, and they have a great marriage, but he still kind of felt this ache inside. And it just, despite his enviable life, he found himself asking, is this really it? Like, I just do this every day for the rest of my life? It just didn't seem to work. And he was wondering if maybe there was a better way. And maybe you hear those stories and maybe you resonate with them. Maybe there was a season of your life in particular where you thought, yep, I felt that way. Or maybe you're there right now. Maybe it's ups and downs. You kind of oscillate between feeling this and not feeling it. It's not uncommon. We're all kind of looking for a better way to do life, a way that works, a way that fulfills. And that's what this sermon series is really about. It's called A Better Way. We're looking at Scripture, and we're learning about the way that God calls us to walk and to live. And this morning we're going to kick off by looking at a passage and look at John chapter 14. So if you have your Bibles, I want to invite you to turn with me to John 14. If you don't have your Bible, feel free to follow along on the screen behind me, or you can download the FCC Monmouth app. You can tap should be the very first item on your home screen, be our sermon notes button. And that'll have an outline of our message along with our passages pulled up so you can just follow along. We're going to look at a few different ones this morning. If you've ever been in this season before where it just doesn't feel like it's working or you're looking for a better way, then what I'm about to say, you already know how true it is. I'm going to ask you to just stick with me because we're going to drill down on it a little bit. The way matters. Now, that may seem like kind of a nebulous statement. I think you'll get what I mean in a minute. The way matters. And we all inherently understand this. If you just take, for example, the way that we speak. What we say is important. You can say all the right things, but you can say it in the wrong way, can't you? A good example of this is a few weeks back, my family and I, we were doing some shopping in Burlington. It was lunchtime. And we wanted to go to Sonic. My boys had never eaten at Sonic before. I thought this is kind of a fun experience. So we went to Sonic, and we pulled into one of the bays with the menu board, and on that menu board was the sign that said, out of order. And I thought, well, that's disappointing. So I backed it up, and I started to go, and I found another bay that was open, but on that menu board was a similar sign, out of order. And as I looked down all of the menu boards in that aisle, about half of them were out of order. And so I went around, I circled to the other side of the restaurant, same story. All the full ones were the operational ones. They were all full, and all the empty ones said out of order. And I was kind of getting a little annoyed and a little frustrated. And I'll be honest, I'm not good at breakfast. So by the time lunch rolls around, I want lunch. And I was starting to get hangry. And so I got around to the original side of the Sonic, and it's noon, so like a lot of cars are coming in. It's starting to get congested. And all the bays that function are full, but somebody started to back out. I thought, great. So I pulled into their spot and looked at the menu board, out of order. I was so frustrated. And so I'm trying to back the van up again one more time, and my boys are in the back going, yep, 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 talking about everything and nothing. He poked me, he looked at me, he exists. They're just complaining about everything and nothing. And it's about that time my wife leans over and asked an innocent question. And I wanted to respond. I wanted to communicate something good, something right. Hey guys, I'm starting to get a little distracted. I'm starting to get a little flustered because traffic's kind of like picking up. Could you guys just, maybe keep the volume down until we get situated and order our food? What I wanted to say was good. The way I said it is not so good. Will everybody just shut your mouths for just a second until I park the car? And my wife, who was the last one to speak, took this very personally. It was not directed at her. What I said was fine. The way I said it, not fine, and caused for a very uncomfortable lunch, we'll just say. The way matters. We all get this. So with that in mind, I want you to listen to what Jesus has to say about the way. This is John chapter 14, starting in verse 1. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I'll come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I'm going. And then Thomas, one of Jesus' disciples, speaks up. He says, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? And here's the verse we're going to drill down on. Jesus answered them, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's getting ready to leave them. So he's preparing them. Because in the next several days, he's going to be executed, he's going to be buried, he's going to be raised back to life, he's going to ascend to heaven. He's leaving them. But he wants them to know that's not a bad thing. In fact, where he's going to prepare a place for them, a place where they can dwell in God's presence forever. And he hasn't forgotten about them. He's coming back for them. This is very good news. And so he says, hey guys, don't fret. But then Thomas speaks up, Jesus, how do we know how to get there? And in our passage, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And that's a very important verse, John 14:6. We oftentimes teach it over in our kids' wing. It's one of those memory verses we want everyone to understand and know. But even as believers, a lot of times we have this tendency to focus on two parts of that triplet at the expense of the third. We talk about Jesus as the truth a lot. And he is the truth. He is the truth about who God is. He's the truth about who we are. He gives us the truth about our condition, our need for God's grace, our inability to be sufficient on our own. He gives us the gospel. He reveals God's word to us. He is the truth. And that's so important to understand. And we talk about Jesus as the life. And he absolutely is the life. He is the key to life everlasting. He is life to the full, as he tells us in John. He is that one that restores us to this life that God dreams us to possess, this unending life. He is the key to life, absolutely, and that's so important to understand. But a lot of times we talk about Jesus as the truth, and we talk about him as the life. Jesus as the way, sometimes we pay attention to it. And it's interesting because it's so important. It's not a complicated word. It's a word that can be translated as road or as path. It's a very generic word. But in saying that he is the way, Jesus isn't just saying, I am the destination. He's saying, in me is the journey itself. It's a journey kind of word. It's in Jesus, it's in Christ that we go along this life, do life in a different kind of way, a way that God dreams us and calls us to be. And the early church kind of understood this maybe a little more than we do. If you read the early chapters of the book of Acts, you'll find that the early believers, they didn't call themselves Christians at first. That happened a little later. They called themselves the Way. They were a group of people that weren't interested in just knowing Jesus as the truth and intellectually understanding him and developing theology about him, though they did. And they weren't solely interested in Jesus as the life and developing this relationship with him and this spiritual connection, though they did that too. They called themselves the Way. They were people primarily interested in doing life the way Jesus calls us to do life, to be walking in his kind of way. Because the way matters a lot. And that's interesting. When you think about Jesus' way, the way he did life, it seems markedly different than how we oftentimes do life. And it yields a markedly different result as well. For instance, we look at Jesus and this picture that we have of him across the four Gospels. Overall, Jesus seems to be a pretty joyful person. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's got his moments. You know, there's the temple where the merchants are exchanging goods and kind of desecrating God's temple, and he turns the tables over. He seems kind of angry there. He gets frustrated. There's John chapter 11, verse 35, shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. Jesus had some sorrow as he dealt with the emotional implications of his friend Lazarus dying and nobody really believing everything he'd been preaching up to that point. He had real emotions, but overall, Jesus' life seems to be a pretty joyful guy. So what about us? Is the way we do life, does that produce an overall generally joyful existence? Or, as the statistics will soon point out as we see, are we a society that's almost entirely consumed by stress? There's a study, it was done by the American Psychological Association. It found that about 51, 52% of men ages 18 to 44 would describe themselves as, quote, completely overwhelmed by stress a majority of the time. Now, if you get outside that age range, past 44, that goes down to about 27, 28%. But that's still a quarter of I'm not going to say older men, a quarter of men beyond the age of 44, because I'll soon be there. A quarter of men at that age are still, quote, completely consumed by stress a majority of the time. That's a lot of people, guys. And women, you do even worse, or you fare even worse. Again, you look at 18 to 44, women, about 50% report that same level. But if you narrow that to 18 to 34, 62% of women report being, quote, completely overwhelmed by stress a majority of the time. Just think of the gravity of that statement. Almost every waking hour of your life is impacted by stress to some degree. This isn't even counting people that would respond, I have a moderate degree of stress that I deal with on a daily basis. We are an incredibly stressed out society. And yet when we look at Jesus' way, he seems to have a very different vibe about him. He's got a lot of joy in his life. He also seems to have a lot of peace when we look at Jesus' life. We don't ever find stories of Jesus really worrying about anything. And even in the book of Matthew, Sermon on the Mount, one of the most famous bodies of teaching Jesus has, he tells us, do not worry. Don't worry about what you'll eat or what you'll drink or what you'll wear. Pagans run after those things. Your Heavenly Father knows that you need them. Jesus has this peace about him. This stems from a faith that God will care for him and meet his needs. So what about you and I? Does our way produce an overall general sense of peace about life? Or are we an incredibly anxiety-riddled society? Again, study, American Psychological Association, they found that 40 million Americans, about 20% of the adult population, 40 million Americans have a diagnosed anxiety disorder that they deal with or struggle with. Now, this is not counting those people who deal with acute anxiety during moments of like life transition and stuff. That would be 100% of the people. But you think about it, 40 million people deal with a light to severe amount of anxiety on a nearly daily basis. That's a lot of worry. What's more concerning to me, when we break that figure down, 50% of them, 20 million of those 40 million, are between the ages of 18 and 24. These are people who really haven't even begun to live their adult lives yet, who many of them haven't had to deal with some of the most stressful seasons and circumstances of their days. There's something about our society and the way we do life that cultivates worry and anxiety inside of us from our earliest ages. And yet when we look at Jesus' way, it's marked by peace. So different. When we look at Jesus' way, he seems to prioritize relationships. And that looks like a little different in different circumstances. Sometimes those are relationships with people. There's one of my favorite stories from the gospel. Jesus is on a really important job. He's going to heal a sick little girl who's on her deathbed. I mean, it's not a small thing that he's doing, and yet he's walking through these busy streets, and there's this woman. She's been chronically ill for over a decade, and she says to herself, if I can just touch the hem of his cloak, if I just touch his coat, I'll be healed. And so in the midst of the busyness, she sneaks a snag of the hem of his cloak, and she is miraculously healed. And she kind of sneaks off thinking that's going to be the end of the story. But Jesus stops, like in the middle of a busy street, and he says, who touched me? And the disciples are like, Jesus, everybody touched you. It's a little busy. But he says, no, somebody touched me. And he makes it a point to go find this woman, even though he's in the middle of this really important task. He makes it a point to go find this woman and to acknowledge her, and not just acknowledge her healing, but restore her socially so that everybody else knows that she's been healed. And he just prioritizes this person in the midst of his busyness. Or sometimes Jesus, he prioritizes relationship with God in a very special way. Oftentimes, Jesus would retreat, and he would just pray, or he would just be in God's presence, sometimes for hours at a time. There's one story, Jesus had a busy day of miracle working, and so he tells his disciples, I need a breather, I need some me time. Why don't you guys get in the boat, you head across the sea, I'm going to go pray for a bit, and I'll catch up. And Jesus is there for hours, into the wee hours of the morning, just praying, being in God's presence. That was his way. And let me ask you, our way, does it prioritize relationships? Or do our relationships oftentimes suffer because of our busyness and our frantic pace? I don't know about you guys, but I can barely pray for 3 minutes, let alone hours on end, without getting distracted, thinking I got to do this today, and this is on my to-do list, and I got to make time for that. Or our relationship with people, that's no better. How many times, let me see if this sounds familiar, you think to yourself, oh, I need to give that person a call, or I need to shoot them a text real quick, but we don't because we're in the middle of something and we're busy, and so we just never do. Or even worse, how many of you have done this before? You don't have to raise your hand. I don't want you to tell on yourself. You're at the grocery store, and you see somebody down the aisle you haven't seen in a long time, and you really should go say hi and catch up, but you got a yard to mow, and you got other stores to go to, and you'll catch up with them some other time, so you just pedal on by like you don't see them. You don't have to raise your hands. But oftentimes, these and other similar circumstances are what we find ourselves in. Our relationships suffer because we're just so busy. And even hearing all of this, a lot of us are thinking, yeah, that's me, but I don't like it. I don't want to do these things. I don't want to live this way. It's not working. There's got to be a better way, right? And that's the funny thing. As Christians even, we believe that Jesus is the way, and yet we find ourselves so many times stuck, spending so much energy living in ways we don't even like. We're just trapped in a cycle. You remember Whitney and Stephen, those people that we talked about earlier? Whitney had that busy job. Stephen, he had that just kind of emptiness inside of him. Would you be surprised to learn that both of those people were Christians? Like, these weren't people that didn't know the grace of God. These weren't people that didn't have the gift of the Spirit inside of them. These weren't people that doubted that Jesus was the way, the truth, and the life. They were believing people. They just found themselves stuck living in a way that was counter to the one Jesus called us to. And how many of us fit that description, right? It happens so many different ways. I was talking with somebody a couple weeks ago. We were talking about our kids. And this person, they had an adult son, working at a job that it was kind of a hard environment to be a faithful man in. Like, there's a lot of negativity, and he even made the comment, he said, Dad, I don't like the man I become when I work there. He didn't like his way, and yet he was stuck living in a way he didn't like. Or myself, I found myself in a season, really still kind of coming out of it. It was just a busy season where it was like boom, 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 boom. There's always something. There's always something to take up your free time. There's always something to occupy the downtime. And I found myself in this moment where like I woke up one morning and said, my prayer life is really just kind of taking a dive. My Bible time is so shallow. It's just routine right now. And I actually found myself saying words, I don't like the kind of disciple I'm becoming. And what was ironic was my small group. We had just finished a wonderful study on Right Now Media. I'd highly recommend it. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And it was all about the need for rest and Sabbath and connecting with God and doing life in a different way, kind of like what we're talking about this morning. And we finished that study. I said, this was great. I loved this. This is great teaching. And then in my foolishness, I went off and I did the opposite. Stuck living in a way I didn't even like. Does it sound familiar to any of us? It's so easy to get caught in our rhythms and in our routines because it seems normal. Everybody lives this way. This is just the way the world works, right? And we keep going in this normal sort of way. But listen to this wisdom God gives us in Proverbs thousands of years ago. Proverbs 14:12. There is a way that appears to be right. It's normal, it's good, it's fine. Everybody lives this way. There's a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. Now maybe in those seasons when we're saying like life's just not working, there's got to be a better way, we're at our wits' end, we feel wrung out all the time. Maybe it's a little dramatic to say that feels like death, but it doesn't feel like life, does it? There's a reason we ache for a better way. And the answer's been there in front of us the entire time. Jesus gave it to us straight up, John 14:6. I am the way. But understanding that Jesus as the way, we need to understand following him, walking with him is not simply an intellectual exercise where I learn about Jesus or I get my theology in order. That's wonderful, but that's not walking the way. And walking with Jesus is not an emotional or a spiritual connection in which I have this relationship with him and I go to church and I worship him and I follow him. That's wonderful, but that's not the way. Do you remember that word we talked about earlier? It's a very simple word. It can mean road, it can mean path. When you get right down to it, doing life with the way of Jesus, it's a matter of walking. It's a matter of doing life alongside Jesus. You just think of the nature of roads for a minute, of ways. We had the North 6th Street by the college. It's close to where I live. Just redid it. Wonderful road. Loved that road. In fact, the first time I drove on it, I went around the block, I drove on it again. It's a wonderful road. Right? But even a wonderful road like that, we don't just sit there and ponder and contemplate that road and try to intellectually understand it. That's silly. And we don't try to build this relationship with the road and connect to it on an emotional and spiritual level. That'd be a waste of time. What do you do with roads? You drive on them or you walk on them. You go down them. That's what roads are for. Jesus is sitting here telling you, I'm the road. I'm the way. It's an invitation not just to think about him or believe in him, but to walk with him in his way. And he gives us this invitation almost in this powerful way. In the book of Matthew, here's this teaching from chapter 11. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. Let's just pause there for a minute. Are you weary? Are you tired? Are you tired of this way? Are you tired of being wrung out? Are you tired of being burdened? Are you tired of being sick? Are you tired of being tired? Are you just tired and weary? Come to me, and I will give you rest. Those are some words worth chewing on for a little bit. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. It's this invitation that Jesus gives us to be yoked to him, which is kind of a weird image. We don't use yokes a lot in modern society. Maybe we're not familiar with it. A yoke it's a farm tool. You got a picture of it so you can see it. It's just basically a bracket. You hook two farm animals together, usually oxen. And together they work in tandem to pull the plow and plow the fields. And it's an interesting picture. Jesus says, "Come be yoked to me. Take my yoke upon you because you're tired and weary and burdened." That's a weird invitation. I'm already tired, Jesus. Why would I want to take this work instrument upon myself? Here's the reality, and I hope I'm not busting anybody's bubble. Life is work. From cradle to grave, life is burden. Life will always require something of us. There's no escaping that. If your hope is that Jesus is going to take 100% of my burden away and life is going to be free and easy, I'm sorry. That's never going to happen. Life is work, but here's the joy of Jesus' yoke. A yoke shares that burden. You think about a literal picture of oxen. If one ox has to pull the plow, that's a whole lot of work for one animal to undertake. But when it's yoked together with another, that burden's cut in half. It's lightened, lifted. It's manageable. In our lives, we can try to go it alone. We can blaze ahead and push the trail and try to live life in this way that seems right. And we can try to carry all that burden ourselves, but it's going to become too much, and you're going to wind up like Whitney on your bathroom floor sobbing uncontrollably. Or we can take Jesus' yoke upon us, and the trials and the tribulations and the stressors and the hardships and the aches and the labor and burden of life can be shared. That sounds pretty good to me. A yoke means a shared burden. It also means a shared pace. Again, you think of those animals yoked together. You're not going to find an oxen just kind of blazing the trail, running ahead of the other one, because they're hooked together. We got a GIF. Let's throw that up there. Sometimes, life is that way. You got somebody that just wants to run ahead, and you end up dragging somebody behind you, right? This is not a yoke. This is not the picture Jesus has in mind, right? We can go to the next slide because it's going to become distracting. You're never going to find that happen with oxen yoked together. If somebody tries to run ahead, they're going to get pulled back and they're not going to get real far because the slower animal sets the pace. Now let's put that in terms of us and Jesus. Who do you think is going to set the pace? Is it you and me who feels like we need to drive 5 miles over the speed limit everywhere we go because we might get there a fraction of a second faster? Or Jesus, who stopped in the middle of a busy street to go find a woman because she was healed and he wanted to meet her and draw attention to her, even though he was on an incredibly life or death, literal kind of mission? It's going to be Jesus. In our breakneck pace, in our busy lives, in our frantic, hectic days, Jesus is always going to move his Jesus pace, and there's no hurrying him along. And when we are yoked with him, when we're doing life his way alongside with him, he sets the pace. It's a slower pace, guys. It's a more deliberate pace. It's an intentional pace. But it's also a pace that allows us to actually see people. It's a pace that allows us to actually connect with God. It's a pace that allows us to rest and be refreshed and refueled. It's a pace, honestly, I'm still trying to learn. I was just talking with somebody in the lobby after church. I said, this is a hard message to preach. It's a little convicting. But it is a pace that Jesus invites us to adopt because it's a different, better kind of way. That yoke, it's a shared pace. It's also a shared direction. You think about two oxen yoked together. They're not going to split and go their separate ways. They're stuck together. For better or worse, they're headed in the same direction, headed towards the same goal, going the same way. And that's a beautiful picture when we consider we're yoked with Jesus. He gets us going in the right direction, and he will not allow us to deviate so long as we're walking with him. And that's the invitation he gives us this morning. To do life his way. Not the way that seems right, not the way the world tells us we have to adopt if we want to get ahead and get this done. The way that actually works. The way that the weak and the weary and heavy laden can come to him and actually find rest. That's the invitation, to go his way. And that's the challenge I want to put before us this morning. Go his way. That slower, more deliberate way, that way that moves in his direction, that way that adopts his pace, a way that shares our burden, a way where we find rest that we long and ache for. You may notice this morning that we did not give a 3-point plan on how to do that. And we did not give you directions on here's how you cultivate that kind of slower pace in life. But that really shouldn't shock us. We've spent our entire lives learning how to do life one way that doesn't work. We're not going to fix it in 30 minutes. But I hope what we have accomplished this morning is that we've opened our eyes and that we just yearn for that rest that Jesus promises. And I hope that you understand, if you're in that place where you feel like it's just not working, it's too much, there's got to be a better way, I hope you're encouraged to find there is a better way. I hope you're inspired to at least try to walk alongside him, to be yoked to him with his pace, with his direction. I hope that we're moved to attempt this. In your bulletins or your app, there are some action steps, actually, some next steps that we could try to implement. They may seem silly at first glance, but I want to encourage you to just try something silly this week. One of them is drive the speed limit. I know that sounds so simple. What does that got to do with Jesus? I want you to choose to slow down, to deliberately slow your pace. Another one is choose the long line at the grocery store. If you're anything like me, you choose the shortest line, or better yet, you choose the self-checkout because, you're like a pit crew from NASCAR just scanning that stuff at Walmart. Choose the long line. Deliberately slow down. Look at the people around you. Maybe pray for one of them. Adopt a different pace. This morning, maybe you're somebody, this is all foreign to you, but you hear this and it sounds interesting. You want to know more about this Jesus guy, and you want to know more about what it means to walk with him. If that's you this morning, I want you to take the connection card. It's on the back of the seat in front of you. And just say, I want to talk about Jesus. Write that on there with your name, your phone number. And at a time that works good for you, I'd love to sit down and just talk about Jesus and what it means to walk with him and the difference that it makes. This morning, maybe you're hearing this and you're going, yeah, I resonate with this, but really, Jesus is going to fix all my problems? Yeah, Jesus is going to fix your problems. That's what he does. He fixes that which is broken. That's the gospel. We broke our relationship with God. We rejected him. We turned away from him. We sinned. We rebelled. We had created this chasm of distance between us, but he reached in with his life, and through the power of his cross and resurrection, he fixed that. We can know God and walk with him now. You look at the brokenness in human relationships. We find so many creative and unique ways to despise one another. And yet we look at this picture of the church in the book of Acts that we mentioned, and we got people of different races and ethnicities and sexes and socioeconomic class and political parties, all that stuff. They're all together, and they're all actually loving each other, taking care of each other, because at the end of the day, despite their differences, they all share in common this tremendous need for God's grace that is only found in Jesus, and humanity actually starts to get fixed through the power of Christ. You look at the brokenness inside of you. All this anxiety, this worry, this stress. You don't think Jesus has the power to fix that? You don't think if he can heal humanity, he can heal our eternity, he can't heal this within us? And he gives us the first step right here. Trust him enough to walk with him and see what happens. And that's what I would encourage us to this morning, church. There is a better way. Walk that way. Walk with Jesus. Father, we thank you for today, and we just thank you for the time that we can spend hearing your word. And I pray that it would not fall on deaf ears or stone hearts. For those who are weary and who are tired, grant them rest, grant them peace, grant them joy as they walk with the Lord. For those of us who are just frustrated, I pray that you just provide some just alleviate the coarseness of life through a journey with Jesus. For those of us who are burdened with guilt, shame, or sorrow, I just pray that the gospel will provide hope and healing as we walk with Jesus. Father, we thank you for our Lord, that he fixes that which is broken. In his name we pray these things. Amen.